Hey there YouTube, welcome to the build review of my XUAV X8 Skysurfer. This plane is designed for my purposes to be a proximity FPV plane. I didn't do any kind of real long range system in it, just a basic little zoom around the park kind of proximity FPV flying. And while my intention was to add a return to home, it didn't work out quite the way I wanted to. So stay tuned and see what happened. Okay, so as I mentioned in the unbox video, and I even pulled together a couple of the pieces I'd be using for the build. One of the component pieces I wanted to use in this airplane was a Bijoli return to home stabilizer. And I have used that particular stabilizer in the past, but when I got the airplane to that point where it was time to put the stabilizer in, one of the things I realized right off the bat is that the stabilizer I had didn't do anything with rudder. And I know how to troubleshoot these things, so I did a lot of testing, but apparently I'm not getting any signal out on the rudder channel. And then the next thing I noticed is no matter what I did with the switch layout to turn the stabilizer on or off, it was always on, and I do not like that. It also told me that I probably would have some kind of difficulty with return to home. So for that reason, I wanted to proceed with the build. I didn't let that stop me. So I went ahead and finished up building the plane anyway. And you might notice on the plane, there's going to be a couple of spare pieces of tape. That's because I just finished it. And I have some tape holding the fuse together while my glue dries, and while the canopy glue dries, there's some tape there too. So I have to let that dry, and therefore you'll see some spare pieces of tape on it. But I just wanted to recap a couple of things that I learned about it, and give you a little surprise that you weren't expecting, and maybe give you some ideas on your own build. So with that, let's just go ahead and jump right into it. Okay, first things first. This kit does not come with any glue at all. You're on your own for glue. And I know there are lots of people with lots of opinions. I'm just going to offer my opinion. I like foam tack. In fact, I've got it right here. This is foam tack. And it does really well on EPO. I think that, especially given where I live in Florida, with the heat, it's a good idea to have glue that's somewhat pliable. I have used hot glue before, but in Florida heat, man, I've also seen hot glue let go. So I stay away from hot glue when it comes to EPO foam, and for that reason, I opted to go with foam tack, and I've been very happy with my results on foam tack. On the canopy, I used a 560. It's a 560 canopy glue. It's available out there. Just search for it. That is recently glued up. It's got to dry. I'll just set that aside. Now, regarding the FPV equipment, again in the unbox video, I covered that I'm just using this little 1000 TV line CCD. I do prefer CCD cameras. I don't like CMOS. You can use CMOS if you like. I know a lot of people swear by them. I'm not a big fan. And I know one of the differences is if you're recording, I don't think you can get jello on CMOS where you can get it on CCD. But that just goes to vibration handling. And normally, I'll talk a little bit about what I've done with this camera. Normally, it's a good idea to isolate your camera from the airframe in order to get nice, smooth video through the goggles. Now, that said, I have spent a little extra time balancing my prop, and this particular motor and prop combination runs very smooth. And if you notice, I'm not dealing with one of those stupid plastic spinners. I'm sticking with the aluminum the aluminum spinner and the collet. And I've already run the motor up on this thing, and it does well. It feels really good. So before I get any more elaborate than this, all I did was I notched out my foam a little bit. I put a little foam tack in. I put some foam tack on the camera, some foam tack on the foam. You just touch them together, let it dry like contact cement, and then you stick it on there, and we'll see what happens. If I get a nice clear picture, then Yahtzee. I'm going to leave it that way. If I don't, then I'll start getting out some isolation concepts, and I'll show you that if it comes to that. In fact, I may do that anyway as a standalone video, but I do have isolation capabilities. But isolation capabilities aren't always required. So we'll do the flying, we'll do a test, and we'll see what happens. Next thing I'll show you is where I mounted the not the ESC, the VTX. And I know in my build review, or sorry, my FPV basics video, I kept referring to this thing as a receiver. I just had receiver on the brain, but that's the video transmitter. I went ahead and mounted mine right up there, right above the canopy. And part of the reason I did that was, first, that's a heavy little piece and I wanted it centerline. And number two, I like getting airflow over those. So putting it there will definitely move some air to help cool that metal case. So, and then the last reason is because I looked at maybe mounting it in the wing upside down, but the antenna that I'm using in this particular case was way too close to the belly, and I would have definitely been in trouble landing that plane with potential damage to that antenna. So I opted just to mount it there. That'll be fine. I'm not going that far away with this plane. I know that happens to be a 600 milliwatt transmitter, and I know with that antenna, that transmitter, and my receiver set up on the SkyZone V2 goggles I have, this will be fine for park flying, no problems. Okay, I mentioned I'd have a little surprise for you, and here it is. So you're going to brace yourself for this because I think you're going to be surprised. But before I get there, let me show you this real quick. The balance point on this airplane, just like so many others, is basically right on the spar. It's 52 millimeters plus or minus 2. You can see that the center of gravity is basically right on the spar, and that's normal. I expect that with most airplanes. So center of gravity on this plane, even with my equipment, my transmitter, my camera, my Fat Shark module, which is right there, even with all that equipment, I was still tail heavy. So I remembered on the previous copy of this plane that I have these batteries that I get from Hobby King, and look at this. This is the surprise. So check that out. That's a 5.2 amp hour or 5200 milliamp hour 3S pack, and with that pack, I had to do one naughty thing, but with that pack, I got that plane to balance right on the center of gravity with the equipment the way it sits. Now, the naughty thing that I had to do, I'm not a big fan of this, but it's okay. I had to put one piece of lead right there on the tail. So I added just a little bit of weight. Now that said, I have a 2200 kV motor in this thing, and I have a 5200 milliamp hour pack. I have used these multi-stars. I'll vouch for them. I've flown hours and hours with these batteries. I've flown Bixler, my Bixler 3 with the Eagle Tree setup and my antenna tracker and my UHF system. You know what I'm talking about? I've flown a long way with these batteries. They're really, by the way, they're 10C. They are 10C packs. There's the focus. You see it's got a 10C discharge on a 5 amp hour battery that's 50 amps capable, and this is about a 30 amp system. So more than enough amperage delivery capability with that battery, and 5,000 milliamp hours, I'll be able to fly this plane for a long time. I expect, because it's a 2200 milliamp hour pack, I expect I should get 20 to 30 minutes with this setup if I'm just cruising around. I could have probably maybe done two 2200s in parallel. That's an option. But for just a little bit of lead, and I know that's not efficient, I get to fly with a 5,000 milliamp hour pack and a glider. So I'm going to do it. And I did do it before, and I have done it in my Bix. That is not a new combination for me. Okay, so that's the build configuration. My ESC, I'm going to show you on this build. I have the ESC right up there, just a couple drops of foam tack. I cut a little slot in the foam rib and slid the ESC in there and put a couple drops of foam tack just to hold it. The reason I did that is because I wanted I wanted the airflow, which comes in right there, to have a clear shot at that ESC. So it does in this case. Okay, the Fat Shark power regulator I told you about is right there. And you'll notice there's a couple slots cut in the bottom just to run wires back to the back compartment. And I am using an L9R. Don't know if you can see that, but L9R receiver. And again, I'm doing that because when you're on FPV and you get a little range, you don't have to fly in just a little close circle. You can go a little bit farther out. So that's why I'm using the L9R. Now, last couple things about this build that I'll talk about. I mentioned in the unbox that I would reinforce those hinges. And I do think it's a good idea when you're flying FPV and the plane's not right in front of you. If you're going to be flying a little bit farther away, it's a good idea to do reinforcement techniques on EPO, like lining your hinges with some fiber tape. And that's what I did there. The fiber tape up front, that's just to hold the fuselage together while it dries. And then the same thing on the back. On the elevator, this is a crucial interface to reinforce with tape. And you notice the tape goes down into the groove. So the way you do that is you exercise the elevator, there it goes, all the way down. And then you just carefully make this line nice and straight. And then just use your finger and just kind of start working it in and go down into the groove, get a nice sharp crease down into the spacing in between the elevator and the horizontal stabilizer, and then finish it off. And if you're careful and slow, you'll get a nice clean application just like that. It's not hard to do. Okay, regarding the motor, I used the standard wood block kit that came with this one. I used epoxy in there for that, for the wood base to go into the motor pod. And then again, I mentioned it's a 2200 kV 2826 Turnigy, and that is a 6.4 prop. Now you do have some options on the way you run your control wires. You notice on this one, I've bent it. And that's a good point, by the way. When it comes to control wires, you want to make sure that the control wire has a very straight linkage and connection to the horn. You don't want, like if you look at where this is coming out, this thing came right up against the elevator and just kind of coasted up there, but I don't want constant downward pressure on that surface. So I put a few bends in it just to kind of alleviate the tension. You should do that with any control surfaces on a plane, by the way. It's a good practice. Okay, one other thing. I mentioned during the unbox that there's a couple of different fuselage, I think I said the words mounting options, and that's not what I meant to say. What I meant to say was there are a couple of different options for mounting the servos. The book they give you, quote unquote book you get with this airplane, it's not very good. It's just a paper sheet. But they do recommend if you're going to fly FPV that you mount the servos outside. There is also provision to mount the servos completely inside and run these control horns or the pushrod guide tubes inside the airplane. And on the elevator, you'd even have it come right out the back. So it's nice, clean setup if you want to do it that way. But I just put mine on the outside. I don't know that there's necessarily a good reason. I think if you're going to fly at FPV and have a flight controller, that's probably what they're aiming at, is to get the servos out of the way so you have room inside for a flight controller. All right. Next thing you'll notice, there is some extra hardening on the bottom. So when I mounted the servos, of course, you scrape, take the decal off, right? You want to take that decal off, use a razor blade, scrape it, glue it in. And then on top of that, I also run my fiber tape down the length. I cover the servo and then run it down the length of the servo wire just to make sure that stays nice and secure. Okay, and then I think the last real bit of information on this one is I told you when I did the unbox, it's got those Chinese quick link, quick disconnects I can't stand. These are Dubros. I got those from Amazon just a couple of days. And I love those things, man. You get those on there. Now, I haven't Loctited yet. I'm going to go fly it first, but once I'm done flying it and I'm pretty sure everything is locked in, I will take that out and Loctite it. But anyway, yeah, I like those Dubro quick disconnects. They're my favorite. One thing I don't like about this particular build is these control horns are plastic and they just go into the surface. There's no retention mechanism on the other side. I'm not a big fan of that. I'd rather have something protrude and a clamping mechanism on the opposite side. I'm just not a big fan of a glued in only control horn, but that's what you're left with on this one. So we'll see how it goes. All right, guys, that is just about it. I think that's all the information I can really give you about the build and the airplane. There were no major surprises. This thing, like I said, the cool thing about foam is once they get the mold process down, it's pretty consistent. So the quality of the parts is fine. It's standard EPO foam, just like every other bit of EPO foam. The hardware is sufficient. The manual is not great. The manual is actually pretty terrible. But the pictures help, and if you have any experience at all building, it's not too hard to figure out how to do this thing. So that's it. That's the build review. Hopefully I'll get a chance to maiden this thing this weekend, and then I'd really like to do some FPV flying with it. I can't wait. It's been a while since I've done this kind of flying, and I'm very excited for it. And I've got a bunch of these batteries too, so if I can get out to the field this weekend, I'll be charging a bunch of these up and flying a lot. So look forward to the maiden flight and the final wrap up. And regarding the flight computer, the only thing I can say about that is it's probably better to use some kind of return to home system if you're going to be flying a little bit further away than a park pattern. I've done this enough where I'm pretty confident in the equipment I have. So and I'm not going to fly that far away, so I'm going to trust my ability, if I lose video, to come off the goggles and find the airplane and get it home. So that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope this has been helpful to you. If it has been, please hit like and subscribe. I need all the subscribers I can get. Share it with your friends and pass the information along, because that helps my results get better placement when people search for this type of material on YouTube. All right, take care.